Antoine had always believed in love, the kind that made poets weep and artists paint masterpieces. In the heart of Paris, where romance seemed to linger in the air, he found himself lost in the eyes of Isabelle. She was everything he had ever dreamed of, elegant, intelligent, and full of life. Their love story unfolded like a classic novel, filled with long walks along the Seine, whispered secrets in candlelit cafes, and promises exchanged beneath the starlit sky. Every moment felt perfect. Isabelle laughed at his jokes, even the terrible ones. She listened intently when he spoke of his dreams, nodding as if she believed in them as much as he did. Antoine had never felt so understood, so deeply connected to another soul. He imagined a future with her, one filled with lazy Sunday mornings, shared glances across crowded rooms, and a love that would stand the test of time. He worked tirelessly, pouring his energy into his career, determined to build a life worthy of her. Every spare moment was spent planning, ensuring that their future would be secure. He gifted her small tokens of his affection, a handwritten note slipped into her bag, a book he thought she'd love, a carefully planned weekend getaway. And in return, she gave him a smile that made his heart race, a touch that sent shivers down his spine, and words that reassured him he was the only man in her world. But love, as Antoine would soon learn, is not always as it seems. There were moments, small ones at first, that planted seeds of doubt in his mind. A missed call she couldn't explain, a sudden distance in her gaze, a hesitation in her voice when she said, "I love you." He told himself he was overthinking. Love required trust, and he trusted her. Yet, late at night, when he lay awake staring at the ceiling, an unease settled in his chest. He pushed it aside, burying it beneath memories of her laughter and the warmth of her embrace. After all, doubt had no place in a love like theirs. And so, with a heart full of hope and a mind clouded by devotion, Antoine made a decision. He would propose. He would solidify their love, silence the whispers of doubt that threatened to creep in. She was his forever, and he would prove it with a ring. As he planned the perfect moment, he clung to the belief that their love was unbreakable. He convinced himself that the unease he felt was nothing more than fear of losing something so rare, so precious. What he didn't know was that love, no matter how passionately felt, cannot survive on belief alone. Some things, no matter how much one wills them to be true, are merely illusions waiting to shatter. The evening was perfect, soft golden lights flickering against the walls of their favorite cafe, the scent of fresh roses in the air, and the quiet hum of a Parisian night unfolding around them. Antoine had never been more certain of anything in his life. As he reached into his pocket, his hands trembled slightly, not from fear, but from the overwhelming emotion of the moment. He placed the small velvet box on the table and looked at Isabelle with eyes full of love. "Marry me," he said, his voice steady, his heart hammering. For a moment, time stood still. Isabelle's eyes widened, her lips parted as if searching for words, and then hesitation. It was fleeting, barely noticeable, but it was there. Then, as if correcting herself, she smiled and whispered, "Yes." Relief flooded Antoine. He slipped the ring onto her finger, kissed her hand, and felt the weight of the world lift from his shoulders. He had been right to trust, right to ignore his doubts. This was love, imperfect but real, and now it was forever. But forever began to unravel faster than he could have imagined. In the days that followed, Isabelle changed. She was more distant, distracted. She began canceling plans, giving vague excuses that didn't quite add up. She no longer reached for his hand the way she used to, and when he looked into her eyes, he saw something missing. Antoine tried to convince himself that it was just the stress of wedding planning, but the unease gnawed at him. Then came the messages, late-night notifications that she would glance at and quickly hide. He told himself it was nothing. Love demanded trust. But trust, when stretched too thin, begins to tear. It was Louis who finally voiced what Antoine had been too afraid to admit. "Something's off," he said one evening, swirling the wine in his glass. "She's different. You see it too?" Antoine wanted to argue, to dismiss it as paranoia, but the words stuck in his throat. One night, unable to shake the feeling in his gut, he followed her. He told himself it was ridiculous, that he was only proving his own insecurities wrong. But as he watched Isabelle slip into a dimly lit restaurant and sit across from another man, laughter spilling from her lips, the world he had so carefully built around their love began to crack. It wasn't a brother. It wasn't a friend. It was something else, something that made her smile in a way she no longer smiled at him. Still, he hesitated. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe he was overreacting. Maybe love could still be enough. But love, as he was beginning to understand, cannot hold together what is already breaking apart. Antoine had always imagined that betrayal would come like a storm, loud, chaotic, undeniable. But the truth was quieter, more insidious, slipping through the cracks before he even realized he was drowning. He couldn't ignore it anymore. The doubts that had once been whispers in the back of his mind were now deafening. He needed to know the truth, no matter how much it might destroy him. So he followed her again. This time, there was no hesitation, no excuses in his mind. His footsteps were heavy, his breath unsteady as he trailed her through the streets of Paris. She walked with purpose, checking her phone, smiling softly at the screen. That smile used to be his. She arrived at a luxury hotel, her movements effortless, practiced. As if this wasn't the first time. Antoine stood frozen as a man stepped out of a sleek black car. Older, well-dressed, confident. He watched as Isabelle greeted him with a kiss, her hands resting on his chest as if it was the most natural thing in the world. There was no guilt in her eyes, no hesitation. The sight knocked the air from Antoine's lungs. He had been holding on to hope, onto love, onto a version of Isabelle that no longer existed, or maybe never had. For a long time, he just stood there. He expected rage, expected the urge to storm inside and demand an explanation. But all he felt was emptiness. A cold, sinking realization that the woman he loved had never truly been his. That night, he waited for her. She walked through the door like nothing had happened, like she hadn't just shattered him beyond repair. When he confronted her, she didn't deny it. She didn't cry, didn't beg for forgiveness. She simply sighed, as if she had been expecting this. "I never meant to hurt you," she said, but the words felt hollow. But love isn't enough. Security, ambition, they matter too. He searched her face for remorse, for the woman he once knew, but all he saw was indifference. Antoine wanted to scream, to demand answers that would make sense of the wreckage she had left behind. But what was the point? He had spent so much time loving her, believing in her, only to realize she had never truly been his to lose. As she packed her things, there was no grand argument, no dramatic farewell. Just silence. A love story ending not with fire, but with ash. Antoine stepped outside, the Parisian night wrapping around him, cold and unfamiliar. Everything looked the same, yet nothing felt real anymore. Love had been his greatest belief. Now, it felt like the cruelest lie. Antoine didn't recognize himself anymore. The man who once believed in love, who built his world around it, had been reduced to a hollow version of what he used to be. Days blurred into nights. The city that once felt magical now seemed indifferent, its beauty lost on him. For weeks, he replayed every moment with Isabelle, searching for the exact second their love had begun to die. He questioned everything. Was it ever real? Had he been blind, or had she simply changed? The answers didn't matter. The pain did. At first, he drowned in it. He withdrew from friends, avoided the places they used to go, refused to touch the remnants of their life together. The ring he once placed on her finger sat untouched in a drawer, a cruel reminder of what he thought they had. But pain, like love, wasn't permanent. One morning, as the sun poured through his window, something shifted. The weight on his chest didn't feel as suffocating. The silence in his apartment didn't seem as empty. He realized then that she had left, but he was still here. So he forced himself to move. He returned to work, threw himself into his ambitions with a focus he had never known before. He reconnected with Louis, who had seen his fall and refused to let him drown. He rediscovered the city, not through the lens of lost love, but as his own again. One evening, as he sat in a quiet cafe, lost in thought, a soft voice interrupted him. "You look like someone deep in thought." He looked up, meeting the warm, curious eyes of Elodie. There was no instant spark, no grand moment of fate, just a simple conversation between two strangers. But for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel the weight of the past pressing down on him. As they spoke, he realized something. Love had not destroyed him. Isabelle had not broken him. He had been wounded, yes, but wounds healed. Love wasn't the enemy. Blind devotion was. Love wasn't about losing yourself in someone else. It was about finding someone who saw you, truly saw you, and chose you as much as you chose them. As the night stretched on, he smiled, genuine, unforced. He wasn't in love. Not yet. But he was open to the possibility.
And that was enough.
He had lost love once, but he had found something greater in return, himself.